Konnichiwa. Today we're going to take the plunge from abstract theoretical Japanese grammar and structure and vocabulary into actual direct immersion in real Japanese material for Japanese people. As you know, I recommend doing this at the earliest stage possible, but it's pretty difficult because once you're in real Japanese material, you're going to encounter vocabulary that you didn't know before, even in very simple material, because small Japanese children have a huge vocabulary compared even to foreigners who've taken quite high-level Japanese exams. This is why I don't recommend core vocabulary decks and things like that. The way to pick up core vocabulary beyond a small base is to pick it up as you proceed through real Japanese material. That way you get the kind of vocabulary you're actually going to be encountering and using. So what I'm going to do is take a simple Japanese story that's not in any way doctored for foreigners, it's just the way it is, and it also has audio, and I'll link you to that in the comments below. So once we've gone through the story and you've got it clear in your mind, you can put the audio onto your phone or your MP3 player and hear it over and over again. That's going to consolidate any new vocabulary. It's going to consolidate the rhythm and spoken form of Japanese and the structure, because they need to move structure and vocabulary from the abstract area where you know them but you have to think about them very carefully to do anything, into the area where it starts to become instinctive. So please use that audio once we've been through the story. It's very short, and I'm going to make a page which I'll link below, where I give the links to the various videos where I talk about the grammar points that we encounter. You're going to see that even in a short and simple story like this, we use a lot of the structure that we encounter in my various lessons. Alright, so let's get started. This is a short and simple fable about a greedy dog. And the first sentence is, Niku o kuwaeta inu ga hashi o watatte imashita. So you see, this is in Desumasu style Japanese. So if you're a little bit uncertain about that, please refer to my Desumasu video. Niku o kuwaeta inu ga. Now, niku means meat, and kuwaeru means hold in one's mouth. It's one of those words that you could do a huge core deck and still not know. And what's happening here is that very common technique of inverting a simple logical clause to turn it into a descriptive clause. So, inu ga niku o kuwaeta is a dog held meat in its mouth, but niku o kuwaeta inu is a dog that was holding meat in its mouth. So that dog is the subject to our sentence marked with the. Niku o kuwaeta inu ga hashi o watatte imashita. Hashi is bridge and wataru is cross. So the dog was in the process of crossing the bridge. Niku o kuwaeta inu ga hashi o watatte imashita. So that's set the scene. We know what's happening. Fuja shita o miru to kawa no naka ni mo niku o kuwaeta inu ga imasu. Now, the first thing to notice here is that this second sentence is in the non-past tense, isn't it? So this is a difference between Japanese narrative convention and English. In English narrative, if the narrative is in the past tense, it stays in the past tense and every sentence is in the past tense. In Japanese narrative, this isn't the case. We can set a narrative in the past tense, but sometimes when we want to give more immediacy to something, we just move into the present tense. This is not allowable in English narrative, but it's perfectly allowable in Japanese narrative, so we need to be aware of that and not let it confuse us. So what's going on here? Futa means suddenly. I'm not going to explain the simplest vocabulary here because I will assume that you've got very basic vocabulary in order to start making the plunge into Japanese narrative. So futa means suddenly. Futa shita or minute to. The dog suddenly looked down. The zero pronoun here is it, the dog. So the dog suddenly looked down, and then down gives a conditional connective, therefore when, and I'll link to that. So it's saying, when the dog suddenly looked down, or the dog suddenly looked down, and when the dog suddenly looked down, kawa no naka ni mo. Kawa no naka ni is in the river, and a mo here is telling us also in the river. Kawa no naka ni mo. Niku o kawaeta inu ga imasu. Jim, also in the river, ate a dog carrying meat in its mouth, not just on the bridge, but also in the river. There's a dog carrying meat in its mouth. Inu wa sore o mite omoimashita. Now, the dog is now being referred to with wa rather than ga, and that's because we've now had the dog introduced, so it's no longer a dog, it's the dog. And I'll link to a video where I explained this. Inu wa sore o mite. Sore is that, and so this is the first part of a compound sentence. The dog saw that. And the te form is giving us the and there. And I'll link to compound sentences. I'm going to stop telling you now what I'm linking to, but if you look at the special page that I've made, which I'll link below, I'll give all the links to the different parts of this story. You probably don't need to follow them all up, but if there are any bits that confused you, you can go to the videos where I have explained those specific points. Right. So, inu wa sore o mite. That's logical clause in itself. The dog saw that, and omoimashita. The dog saw that and found. Aiensu no niku yohou ga ookisou da. Aiensu, that filling that type, that character. Aiensu no niku no po ga. That's to say the side of that character's meat. That character's meat as opposed to my meat. Ookisou da. So that's the connecting of so to the adjective ooki, yaks, meaning it looks or appears. Bigger. The side of that character's meat appears bigger than mine. How do we know it's a comparative? Because of the whole, which is telling us that we're talking about the side of that character's meat as opposed to some other side, which in this case is going to be my meat. Inu wa kuyashikute tamarimasen. Kuyashi is an adjective, and it means that something is irritating or annoying. But like all adjectives are subject to emotion, when it's applied directly to the individual, it can refer not to the annoyingness of the object, but to the annoyance of the individual. So that's what it's doing here. Inu wa tsuyashi means the dog was annoyed. Could mean the dog was annoying, but in this case it means the dog was annoyed. And then tamarimasen. Tamaru is to bear or endure, so tamarimasen means not bear. Now when you add te tamarimasen to something, we are saying that it was to an unbearable degree. The dog was annoyed to an unbearable degree at seeing this other dog with what he believed to be a larger piece of wheat than his own. And then we have a quotation from the dog. Soda, aiensu otokashite niku o totte yarou. Soda. Okay then, that's the case. Aiensu wa Odokaste. Odokasu is to intimidate or scare someone. So I'm going to scare that fellow and anoniku o totte yaro. Anoniku, of course, is the meat. Toru is take. Totte yaro is related to agaru, to do an action, up to someone, to give someone the benefit of your action. Te yaro is like te agaru in that it means do it for someone else, but instead of being honorific, it's the reverse of that. It's doing down to someone else, and doing to someone that you consider inferior. So, for example, it would be appropriate to do te yaro for feeding the dog, because the dog really is legitimately considered inferior. In a case like this, it's just a rather rude way of speaking. And of course, what he's going to do is not a favor to the dog, he's going to steal something from this poor dog in the river. And so it's rather like when someone might say in English, I'm going to punch your head for you, which is phrasing it as if you were doing someone a favor, when actually you're doing someone something that isn't a favor. I'll take that meat for him. Soko de inu wa sawa no nata no inu o mutakke amoi jiri hoimashita. Inu wa sawa no nata no inu ni mutatte. Mukala is to face towards. So a dog faced towards, directed its action towards the dog in the river. Amoi jiri hoimashita. Kueru, he is true. But, and amoi jiri is amoi is thought or feeling. And when we add this jiri, which is actually the jiri or cut, it means to do something completely, to do it to the cutting point, we might say. So, amoi jiri means putting one's whole thought into it, one's whole heart into it. So, the dog faced towards the dog in the water and put its whole effort into barking at it in order to scare it. Well, as you all know, wan is woof woof in Japanese. Sono toten. Sono toten means at that moment. Toten is just as something happens or just after it happens. So, sono toten, at that juncture, at that point, at that moment, kawaete ita niku wa pachen ja sawa no nata ni ochite shimaimashita. So at that point, the meat, such as being held in the mouth, kawaete ita niku wa panchu, which is a splash type sound effect, puchen to. Then to, of course, marks sound effects. Sawa no naka ni into the river. Ochite, ochiru, kyanfao, shimaimashita. And that shimaimashita is saying it done fell into the river. And I'll link to the video on that shimaimashita chanta, which means that done happened. Sawa no nata ni wa tarishita inu no tao ga banzate imasu. And again, he switched into the present tense to give more immediacy to this. Inside the river. Tarishita. Tari games. Upset, depressed, disappointed, dejected. Bunsera is reflect. Tao is face. So, inside the river, the face of a disappointed, miserable dog was reflected. Sakti no kawa no naka no inu wa mezu ni ta jibun no kao ta no desu. No desu. The fact is that it was. The fact is that it was what? The fact is that Saki no kawa no naka no inu wa saki in this case means just before or previous. So saki no kawa no naka no inu is the dog in the river from just before. Mizu ni utsutta jibun no kao da ta. Jibun is oneself, so it's one's own face inflicted in the water. Mizu ni utsutta jibun no kao da ta no desu. The fact is that it was. The fact is that the previous dog in the river was one's own face inflicted in the water. And now there are two morals that follow this story, and are put into one long compound sentence, which looks a bit difficult, so let's just break it into two parts. Onaji mono o motte ite mo. Shito ga motte iru mono no hou ga yoku rie. Best of all, that mie is the rannyoke, the A stem of nyaru, to be visible or look like. It doesn't look like an E stem because it's an ichidan verb, and if we know all the stems of the ichidan verb look the same. But the E stem of a verb can be used, especially in literary contexts, like the te form, to connect two logical clauses within a compound sentence. So that nia is completing a logical clause and then leading on to the second logical clause, which is the other moral of the story. So let's look at the first moral first. Onaji mono omotte ite mo. Now, the te mo ending, as we know, means even though. Can we think onaji mono, the same thing. Omotte ite mo is in the state of carrying, or holding, or possessing. So, even though they possess the same thing, onaji mono, shito ga motte iru mono, the thing that people tell, and shito here means other people. You'll often see this in Japanese. Hito in general can mean other people. It means people in general, but it means people other than oneself. Hito ga motte iru mono, what other people have, no hou ga yoku mieru. The whole, once again, is that comparative, the side of what other people have. Yoku is, of course, diri. So yoku mieru is appear good. So the side of the things other people have appears good. In other words, in comparison to one's own things, their things appear good. So the first moral is, even though it's the same thing, something that other people have can appear better. And that's the first moral. In English, we'd probably put that the other way around and say, other people's things appear better than ours, but in fact, they're the same. And mata means again, or in cases like this, it means also. For also, the second moral is, yokubaru to kenchoku, son o suru toyu ohanashi desu. Yokubaru is to be selfish, to be full of glittery, to be full of desires and wants. Yokubaru. Yokubaru to. Just again, this connect to if or when to, in this case, if. When yokubaru, if one is full of selfish desire. Tenchoku, which means in the end. Kekyoku, son o suru. Son means loss. Son o suru means literally do a loss, but in fact means have a loss or suffer a loss. So, in saying, if you're full of selfish desires, in the end, you'll have a loss. Toyu ohanashi desu. Toyu, so this is quoting that saying, if you're full of selfish desires, you'll have a loss. Toyu ohanashi da. Ohanashi is a story, a monogatari, ohanashi. So this is a story that says, if you're full of selfish desires, you'll have a loss. So there we are. It's a very short story. As you see, there's a note in there, even in a short or very simple story. And like this, we come across all kinds of the things that we've learned in the course of the structure series. And if we use what we've learned, we can understand everything in the story. So now, go over that carefully at your leisure using this video. Make sure you understand everything in it and then put it on your phone or your MP3 player or whatever it is you use and listen. Get the new vocabulary into your mind, but more importantly than that even, get the structure, the feel of it into your mind so it stops being abstract work, the kind we've done right here, explaining everything, and starts to become intuitive grasp of language. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments below, and I will answer as usual. I'd like to thank my Gold Kokeshi patrons, my producer angels who make these videos possible, and all my patrons and supporters on Patreon and everywhere. And I'd like to thank you for attending this lesson. Kurikana mo yoroshiku onegai shimasu. Class dismissed.